The desert never cared who you were, only if it could draw blood. Its voice hissed through wind-driven sand, grinding into bone and bleaching saints and thieves alike. Lila Kerrigan had learned that truth years ago, the day she laid her husband into the ground with no marker, no witness, no prayers. Now, as the sun clawed across a blistered New Mexico sky, she moved alone, barefoot in memory, blistered in hope, unaware that this day would force her into a choice that would brand her soul deeper than any ring ever had. The tin pail at her hip swayed with each step, its open mouth gaping at the heat like it too longed for water. The creek, what little was left, carved a thin scar through the land a mile from her cabin and twice that from anything you could call mercy. Sweat glued her dress to her back, dust gritted between her teeth, and every breath came dry. She had walked this path 1,000 times, but never had it felt so heavy, not until she saw him. At first, she thought the shape in the dirt was just another carcass, abandoned by coyotes or left behind by vultures too full to finish their meal. Then she noticed it, the faint lift and fall of a chest, uneven, stubborn against surrender. Lila stepped closer, careful. The man, young, perhaps 20, lay twisted beneath a juniper, skin dark as weathered cedar, a crust of dried blood on his cheek. An arrow jutted from his thigh, snapped mid-shaft. His shirt hung in tatters, exposing the sinew of a body marked by both war and weather. Blood had matted his hair to his brow. His lips were split, his eyes were shut. She stopped cold. Her late father's warning echoed in her head like the low toll of a church bell. If you find one alone, girl, he's bait. The rest won't be far. But her feet refused to turn. She crouched, balancing the bucket in one hand, the other hovering inches from his throat. His pulse, faint, but there. When she shifted his head, he groaned, the sound low, almost animal, not threatening, just proof of life. Lila dipped her fingers in the bucket and let droplets fall onto his cracked lips. He twitched, swallowed, murmured something in a language she didn't know, neither English nor Spanish. A name? A prayer? A curse? The sharp drumming of hooves behind her snapped her upright. 6 riders burst through the dust, rifles in hand, bandanas masking their faces. Only one rode with the slow arrogance of ownership, Clay Rourke. Well now, Miss Kerrigan, he drawled as his horse pulled alongside. Looks like you've gone and found yourself some trouble. His eyes swept over the wounded man at her feet. That's one of the Calaveras, he spat. Killed 2 of ours out by the gulch. Ran when the lead started flying. If you patch him up, you're no better than he is. He's bleeding out, Lila said, spine stiff though her knees felt unsteady. Then let him, Rourke snapped. Help him, and you might as well paint your face and take up his bow. One of the younger men chuckled. Let her keep him. He'll cut her throat for sundown. Lila's hand curled tight around the bucket's handle, as if it were made of steel. You point that rifle on my land again, she said, her voice trembling but steady enough, and I'll put you in the dirt beside whoever you're chasing. The threat hung in the air like lightning waiting for a strike. Rourke's sneer deepened, but after a long pause, he spat into the dust. You always did have a weakness for the broken, he muttered before jerking his reins. His men followed, their silence dripping with mockery. When they disappeared, Lila knelt again, hands trembling. You'd better be worth this, she whispered. She tore her scarf into a tourniquet and hauled him over her shoulder, her back screaming, knees buckling. Somehow, she made it home. The cabin, bleached by years of sun, was the last standing piece of a life she'd long since stopped believing in. She kicked the rug aside, lifted the cellar hatch, and let the cool breath of earth wash over her. Lowering him into the shadows, she muttered, I'll regret this, but not today. She tossed down a blanket, a tin of salve, and her half-filled canteen, then shut the hatch, bolted the door, and let herself collapse against the wall. Her rifle lay across her lap. Her throat burned. Her fingers ached from dust and fear. I hope you live, she murmured into the silence. Because I just wagered everything I have on a man I don't even know. By morning, the wind had shifted, bringing with it the scent of distant rain and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Lila rose before the sun, her bones aching from the weight of yesterday's decision. She unbolted the cellar door and let the early light spill down the ladder. The man stirred, blinking against it. His eyes, dark, sharp, and wary, darted to hers, then to the walls, as if mapping every possible escape. "You're alive," she said, more to herself than to him. He tried to sit, but hissed when his leg protested. The arrow was gone. She'd pulled it the night before, but the wound still seeped through her bandages. "I gave you water. Bread's on the crate," she said, nodding toward the corner. "Eat slow, or you'll make yourself sick." He reached for the loaf with a trembling hand, broke a piece, and chewed without looking away from her. "What's your name?" she asked. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Tarek." It was short, low, weighted like a stone dropped in a well. "I'm Lila. You're on my land. That means you follow my rules." His gaze flickered, unreadable. "Why? Why what? Why save me?" Lila swallowed. "Because you were dying. Plenty of folks would have let me," he muttered. She thought of Rourke's sneer, of her father's warning, of the way this man's pulse had fought to stay steady in her palm. "Maybe I'm not plenty of folks," she said, standing. From outside came the distant clatter of a wagon. She froze, listening. Tarek's head lifted, eyes narrowing. "Stay quiet," she ordered, stepping to the window. A single wagon rolled into view, dust curling off its wheels. On the seat sat Sheriff Hartwell, Rourke's oldest drinking partner, and beside him, a deputy with a ledger in his lap. They pulled up near her porch. Hartwell climbed down, boots crunching over gravel, and tipped his hat without smiling. "Morning, Miss Kerrigan," he said. "We're checking for strays." Her fingers tightened on the windowsill. "Strays? Word is, one of the Calaveras slipped the noose yesterday. Men say you were seen on the creek road round the same time." She kept her voice even. "Plenty of folks use the creek road." The deputy squinted at her. "Not in that heat." Hartwell's eyes swept over the cabin door, the windows, the ground. "Mind if we take a look inside?" Lila felt her heartbeat hammering in her ears. "I do mind," she said. "You got a warrant?" Hartwell's mouth twitched. "Now, Lila, we both know I don't need paper to keep this town safe. Then we both know I don't open my door without it." For a moment, no one moved. Then Hartwell sighed, spat into the dirt, and tipped his hat again. "Suit yourself. But if he's here..." He let the rest hang in the air like the crack of distant thunder. The wagon rolled away, its rattling wheels fading into the heat-hazed horizon. Lila closed the shutter and leaned her forehead against the wall, letting out the breath she'd been holding. Below, in the cellar's cool shadow, Tarek spoke for the first time since their exchange. "You just made yourself their enemy. Wasn't much of a friend to them before," she said, gripping the ladder. He watched her climb down, his jaw set, eyes sharp. "Then you'd better be ready for what comes next." The next 2 days passed like a taut rope, every hour pulled tighter. Lila kept Tarek hidden in the cellar, bringing him food and water when the sun was high and the road outside lay empty. By the third evening, the wound had started to knit, though his leg was still stiff. She found him sitting up, peeling apart one of the bandages. "You tear that open, you'll bleed out before I can fetch more linen," she said. His mouth curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. "You patch me up, then tell me not to move. Hard man to please." "Lucky for you. I'm not here to please," she replied, setting down a jug of water. He studied her, as if trying to measure the space between her words and what she meant. "You live out here alone?" "Been that way near 4 years." "Why?" She busied herself with the fire, poking at the embers until they flared. "Lost my family. Lost the will to be anywhere crowded." Tarek leaned back against the wall, his dark eyes catching the firelight. "Crowds can be dangerous. And men who ride with outlaws aren't," she shot back. For the first time, he looked away. "I didn't ride with them. Not willingly." Her hands stilled on the iron poker. "Then how? They took me. Forced me. Either I rode where they pointed, or I didn't live to see the next dawn." Lila searched his face for the telltale twitch of a lie. She found only weariness, the kind that doesn't come from one night's trouble. A low rumble rolled across the plains, and she moved to the window. Far off, Clouds were gathering, black against the setting sun. "Storm's coming," she murmured. Tarek's voice was quiet. "It's not just the weather." She turned. His gaze was fixed on the door. A horse's hooves thundered past, close enough that the cabin walls trembled. Lila held her breath until the sound faded. "Friends of yours?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No. If they were mine, you'd already be dead." That answer did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, she sat by the shuttered window with her rifle across her lap. The storm broke, wind shrieking through the eaves, rain pelting the roof like thrown gravel. She didn't sleep, not even when the wind quieted. Somewhere in the darkness, hooves echoed again, slower this time, deliberate, and she knew without looking that trouble hadn't passed them by. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Lila stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground, and scanned the horizon. Nothing but a smear of gray sky and the distant shimmer of the river. Inside, Tarek was awake, sitting at the table with the blanket still draped around his shoulders. He looked as though he'd been listening for every sound while she was gone. "Clear out there?" he asked. "For now," she said, hanging her rifle back on the wall. "But the tracks are fresh. Whoever rode past last night didn't get far." Tarek's brow tightened. "Then they'll be back." She didn't argue. Instead, she placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of him. "Eat. You'll need the strength." He glanced at the food, then at her, as though weighing whether to trust either. Still, he picked up the spoon. They ate in silence until the creak of wagon wheels reached their ears. Lila froze, her hand still halfway to her mouth. "Stay here," she whispered, grabbing the rifle again. Outside, a pair of mules trudged toward the cabin, pulling a cart piled high with burlap sacks. The driver, a wiry man in a dust-streaked hat, lifted a hand in greeting when he saw her. "Mornin', Miss Harrow," he called. "Got some flour and salt for you, same as last month." Relief loosened her grip on the gun. "You're early, Eli. Storm changed my route. Figured I'd stop before the trail got messy again." She stepped down from the porch to meet him, keeping her voice casual. "Seen any riders?" Eli scratched at his jaw. "Couple fellas heading west, late last night. Didn't look friendly." Her stomach nodded. "They come this way." Near enough I could hear him shouting. Couldn't make out the words. He hesitated, lowering his voice. "You in trouble?" Lila forced a faint smile. "Just keeping watch. You know how it is out here." Eli didn't press, but his eyes lingered a moment longer than usual before he tipped his hat and flicked the reins. When she returned inside, Tarek was standing by the window, tension in every line of his body. "They're looking for me," he said flatly. "I guessed as much. If they find me here," his voice trailed off, but the warning in it was clear. Lila set the rifle on the table between them. "Then we'd better make sure they don't." For a moment, neither moved. Outside, the mule's hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving the cabin wrapped in a silence that felt like the moment before a match is struck. That afternoon, the wind picked up again, stirring dust into thin, curling streams across the yard. Lila worked quickly, checking the hinges on the shutters and making sure the cellar trapdoor could be bolted from the inside. Tarek followed her movements, his limp more noticeable now that he was on his feet. "You've done this before," he said. "More times than I'd like," she replied, testing the latch on the back door. "Against men like them?" She didn't look at him. "Against worse." He was silent for a moment, then stepped closer. "If you help me get to the river, I can lose them." "You wouldn't have to. That river's 2 days' ride through open land," she cut in. "You wouldn't last half that with your leg." His jaw worked as though he wanted to argue, but instead he leaned against the wall, watching her with an unreadable expression. Late in the day, she went out to fetch water from the well. The bucket had barely touched the surface when she heard it, the faint drumming of hooves in the distance. She froze, listening. The sound was growing. By the time she reached the porch, Tarek was already there, rifle in hand. "They're coming," he said. From the rise to the east, 4 riders appeared, their dark shapes cutting sharp against the sky. They weren't rushing, but the way they fanned out across the plain left no doubt. They meant to close in. Lila's mind raced. "Cellar, now," she ordered. He shook his head. If they search, they'll find me. Better we face them. That's not better, she snapped. But he was already limping toward the yard, jaw set. She swore under her breath, then followed. They stood side by side as the riders drew closer, dust billowing behind them. The lead rider pulled up about 20 paces away. He was broad-shouldered, with a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw. His grin was all teeth and no warmth. Well, he drawled. Didn't expect to find you here, Tarek. Tarek's voice was calm. You found me. Now turn around. The man laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. Afraid not. We've come for what's ours. Lila stepped forward, rifle steady. He's not yours. The man's grin faltered, just a fraction. Lady, you don't know what you're stepping into. I know enough, she said, her finger tightening on the trigger. The wind shifted, carrying the heavy smell of dust and rain. And in that moment, Lila understood. Whatever happened next would not end without blood. The standoff stretched long enough for the dust to settle between them. No one moved, no one blinked. Then the scar-faced man swung down from his saddle, boots sinking into the soft dirt. His hand rested casually on the grip of his revolver, but there was nothing casual in the way his eyes tracked Tarek. You've been running a long time, he said. But you know how it goes. A debt's a debt. Tarek's jaw tightened. That's not what this is about, and you know it. The man's grin returned, slow and poisonous. Maybe not, but you made me lose face back in Abilene. And I don't forget things like that. Lila shifted her stance, keeping the rifle barrel trained steady. You should leave while you still can. One of the other riders, a wiry man with a crooked nose, laughed. Listen to her, bold as brass. The scar-faced man ignored him. Hand him over, and we'll be on our way. No trouble for you. That's not going to happen, Lila said, her voice flat. For a moment, the only sound was the restless snort of the horses. Then the man's expression hardened. Your choice, lady. He moved fast, too fast for someone his size, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. But Lila had been expecting it. The crack of her rifle split the air, and the man's shot went wide, kicking up dirt near her boots. Everything erupted at once. The other riders fanned out, shouting, guns drawn. Tarek dove for cover behind the water trough, returning fire with quick, measured shots. The smell of gunpowder burned the back of Lila's throat. One rider's horse reared and bolted, sending its rider tumbling hard to the ground. Another took a shot at the cabin, shattering the window. Back inside, Lila shouted over the chaos. Tarek gritted his teeth, limping toward the porch as bullets whined past. She covered him, firing at the nearest rider until he wheeled his horse away. The moment they were through the door, she slammed it shut and dropped the bar into place. Her breath came fast, her hands trembling, but she forced them steady as she reloaded. Outside, the riders regrouped, their shadows moving across the windows. They're not leaving, Tarek said, his voice grim. Lila's eyes met his. Then we make sure they regret staying. The first heavy drops of rain struck the roof, masking the soft shuffle of boots in the mud outside. Lila crouched near the window, watching the riders fan out in a loose circle. They'll try to flush us out, Tarek murmured from beside the table, where he was checking the revolver's cylinder. She nodded. Or set the place on fire. Lightning flashed, throwing the scar-faced man's silhouette against the stormy sky. He was barking orders, his voice nearly lost beneath the roll of thunder. Lila's pulse thudded in her ears. She had been in her share of bad scrapes before, but something about this felt different, tighter, like a snare cinching around them. The first push came hard. Two men rushed the porch, firing through the door. Splinters rained from the wood, and the bar shuddered under the force. Lila fired back through the crack between the shutters, catching one man in the shoulder. He dropped his gun and fell back, swearing. The second man kept coming, slamming into the door. Tarek limped over, bracing his weight against it until the pounding stopped. Then came the smell, faint at first, then stronger, smoke. They're trying to light the side wall, Tarek said, voice sharp. Without thinking, Lila darted to the rear window. Sure enough, a torch blazed in the scar-faced man's hand, its flames licking at the rain. She grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the stove, pushed the window open just enough, and hurled it. The skillet hit the man square in the arm, knocking the torch into the mud. He cursed, clutching his elbow, and stumbled back. Tarek let out a short, surprised laugh, but it died quickly as more riders closed in. "This can't go on all night," he said. "I know," Lila replied, reloading again. Her hands were steady now, "which is why we end it before dawn." Thunder cracked overhead, and for a heartbeat, everything was light and sound. In that flash, she saw the riders' positions, their weapons, the way they moved, and an idea began to take shape. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it was the only way they'd walk out alive. The rain had turned the ground into a slick mess, each step sinking into the mud. Lila whispered the plan to Tarek in quick, clipped words. His brows furrowed, but he gave a sharp nod. They moved together, quiet as they could, using the thunder to mask the sound of the back door unlatching. The riders were still focused on the front, their attention fixed on the barricaded door and shattered windows. Lila led the way, circling wide behind the barn. Her boots squelched in the muck, heart hammering in her chest. The scar-faced man stood near the corral, gesturing for two of his men to push forward. He didn't see her until she was almost on him. "Drop it," she ordered, rifle leveled. His eyes widened, then narrowed into a smirk. "You're braver than you look." "Brave enough," she said. Before he could make a move, Tarek came from the shadows, knocking the pistol from the man's hand with a solid blow. The gun skidded into the mud. The other riders spun at the commotion, but it was too late. Lila fired into the air, a sharp, echoing crack that made the horses rear and scream. Panic rippled through the men as their mounts bolted, throwing them into the mire. One tried to raise his weapon, but Tarek's shot clipped the post beside his head, sending splinters flying. That was enough. The riders scrambled to their feet, retreating into the night, their curses swallowed by the storm. Only the scar-faced man remained, breathing hard. Mud streaked his coat, his pride in tatters. "This isn't over," he spat. "It is for tonight," Lila replied, lowering her rifle. Tarek's gaze stayed on him until he finally backed away, vanishing into the darkness. The yard fell silent except for the ring. Lila's shoulders sagged, the tension draining from her bones. She met Tarek's eyes, both of them soaked, mud-streaked, but still standing. "You didn't have to stay," he said quietly. "I know," she answered, "but I wasn't about to watch you fight alone." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tarek gave a faint smile, small, but real. "Guess I owe you one. You can pay me back by fixing that busted window," she said, glancing at the cabin. Together, they walked back through the mud, the storm finally beginning to ease. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the first pale light of dawn was waiting.